What the horse does to the girl in the wheelchair is incredible. It will make you cry. In a small town nestled between rolling hills, there lived a young girl named Sarah. She was only 16, but the weight of her world felt much heavier. A life she once imagined filled with adventure, laughter, and possibilities was now confined to a wheelchair. The accident that had taken away her ability to walk was a year-old memory, but the pain it caused had never quite faded. Sarah had been an active, joyful child, always running around with friends, playing in the fields and climbing trees. Her laugh was infectious, and her energy seemed endless. But one fateful day, a tragic fall changed everything. One moment, she was riding her bike, feeling the rush of wind against her face, and the next, she was in the hospital, unable to move her legs. It didn't take long for Sarah to realize that her life had been altered in ways she couldn't yet understand. The first few weeks after the accident felt like an endless blur. Days merged into nights, and her new reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. The bright, wide world she once knew seemed so far away, and the life she had dreamed of felt like a distant memory. People tried to reassure her with kind words, telling her that things would get better with time. But Sarah couldn't help but feel trapped in a body that no longer felt like her own. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want people to pity her. She just wanted to feel normal again. But every time she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw a girl who was no longer the same. School had become a struggle. Her classmates didn't mean to be unkind, but they didn't know how to treat her either. Some avoided her altogether, unsure of how to interact with someone who was no longer whole. Others looked at her with that pitying gaze that she hated, as if her wheelchair defined her. Sarah had always been independent and outgoing, but now, she found herself retreating into the corners of her room, avoiding the world outside. Every day felt like an uphill battle. The mornings were the hardest. The moment she woke up, the heaviness of her reality hit her all over again. The mirror revealed a reflection of a girl who no longer fit in with the world she once knew. The endless days spent in therapy, trying to regain some control over her body, only reminded her of everything she had lost. Even simple things like getting out of bed or brushing her hair became monumental tasks. But it wasn't just her physical limitations that weighed heavily on her. It was the emotional toll that came with it. Sarah longed for the days when she could simply walk outside and feel the grass beneath her feet, when she could run through the woods and feel the freedom of being alive. Now, the world seemed so much smaller, and Sarah's dreams seemed so much farther away. Her family, though supportive, couldn't fully understand what she was going through. They tried their best, encouraging her to stay strong and reminding her that she was still the same person on the inside. But the truth was, Sarah often felt like a stranger to herself. She didn't recognize the girl in the wheelchair, the girl who had to rely on others for the most basic of things, the girl who had been left behind by the life she once knew. It was in these moments of loneliness and self-doubt that Sarah would find herself staring out the window of her bedroom, watching the world go by. People were living their lives, running and walking, playing and laughing. And Sarah, though surrounded by love and support, often felt like she was standing still, watching life pass her by. The longing in her eyes was palpable, a quiet wish for something more, something that would change her world forever. Little did she know, the very thing she was waiting for was closer than she could have ever imagined. And it would come in the most unexpected way, from a source she never would have believed possible. Across town, just beyond the sprawling fields and winding dirt roads, there was a small farm. It wasn't much, just a few acres of land and an old barn that creaked in the wind. But for the animals that lived there, it was home. Among them was a horse named Thunder, a majestic creature with a coat as dark as the night sky, and a mane that flowed like silk in the breeze. Thunder wasn't just any horse. He was special in ways that most people never understood. Thunder had always been different. Born on a distant ranch, he had been trained for racing, his strong legs built for speed and his heart full of the ambition to win. As a colt, he was wild and free, his spirit untamed. But racing didn't bring Thunder the joy he expected. The noise, the crowds, the pressure to perform. It all weighed on him. The races themselves were just blur after blur. the excitement fading into exhaustion with each passing finish line. Thunder wasn't built for the life he had been given. After years of running around racetracks, it became clear that Thunder had no desire to race anymore. His spirit was worn down by the constant strain, and his joy had faded like the setting sun. When the race owners decided to retire him, they sent him to the small farm, where he would live out his days as a companion to the other animals. For the first time in his life, Thunder was free. But that freedom came with its own set of challenges. The farm, though peaceful, was far from perfect. The land was rugged, and the barn was old and often cold during the winter months. Thunder had no trouble with the physical tasks. He was strong and capable, his muscles built from years of racing, but what he struggled with was the quiet. The farm was far from the bustle he had once known, and without the adrenaline of racing to keep his mind occupied, Thunder began to feel the weight of loneliness settle in. The other animals, though friendly, were distant. He had been used to the energy of the racecourse, the thrill of competition, but here, there was nothing but the sounds of the wind and the occasional call of a bird. Thunder spent most of his days grazing in the field, his dark eyes often staring off into the distance. He was content in his own way, but there was something missing. He had given so much of himself to a life that no longer served him, and now he was left with nothing but a quiet pasture to call home. Thunder had grown used to being around people, yet he kept his distance. He wasn't sure how to connect with them anymore. He'd been trained to run, not to bond. And so, he often kept to himself, roaming the fields alone as if waiting for something, or someone, to fill the emptiness inside him. But deep down, Thunder's heart still carried a glimmer of hope. He hadn't forgotten the joy of connection, the thrill of companionship. He was still a horse with a heart full of love and loyalty, even if he didn't know where to channel those feelings anymore. What Thunder didn't realize was that his life, though peaceful, was about to change. A new presence was soon to enter his world, and it would come in the form of someone just as lost as he was. A girl who, like him, was yearning for something more. One fateful morning, as the sun rose over the fields and cast its golden light across the land, Thunder felt a strange pull toward the barn's gate. He didn't know why, but something told him that today was different. Today, he would encounter something that would alter the course of his life forever. The lonely horse and the girl in the wheelchair were about to meet, and neither of them could have ever predicted the extraordinary bond they would form. It was a quiet afternoon when Sarah's life was about to take an unexpected turn. She had been spending her days at home, as usual, staring out the window, watching the world outside and wishing she could be a part of it. The cold, damp air had settled in for the day, and the gray sky mirrored the heaviness she often felt in her heart. It had been months since she had felt any real joy, months since she had connected with anything or anyone the way she once had. She didn't expect that anything could change that, not now. But today was different. Her parents had decided that Sarah needed a change of scenery, a break from the monotony of her room. They had taken her to the small farm on the outskirts of town, a place where they hoped she could experience a bit of peace and maybe, just maybe, feel a connection to something beyond her wheelchair. It wasn't much of a destination, just a few acres and an old barn, but something about the quiet countryside calmed her. As Sarah was wheeled through the farm's entrance, she felt the cool breeze kiss her face, something she hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. The scent of fresh hay and grass filled the air, and for a moment, she let herself breathe in deeply, trying to enjoy the calm, even if only for a few minutes. The farm wasn't exactly where she imagined herself, but it was something different, something new. Her parents chatted with the farmer, and Sarah sat quietly, observing the animals around her. There were chickens pecking at the ground, a few goats hopping around playfully, and a couple of dogs running freely in the open yard. But it wasn't the other animals that caught her attention. It was a lone figure standing at the far end of the pasture. A horse. At first, Sarah wasn't sure why she felt drawn to him, but she couldn't look away. His black coat shone against the dull backdrop of the cloudy sky, his mane flowing gently in the wind like it had a life of its own. He stood tall and proud, his eyes distant but filled with an odd sense of knowing, as if he understood something about the world that Sarah hadn't yet grasped. The horse was everything Sarah longed to be, free, unburdened, and full of life. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw him move. He didn't trot or gallop, but there was a purposeful stride to his movements, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Sarah was transfixed. Her eyes followed him as he made his way toward the far fence. It was strange. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed seeing a creature so powerful and yet so graceful. "Would you like to meet him?" the farmer asked, noticing Sarah's gaze. Before she could even answer, her parents wheeled her over, gently guiding her closer to the fence. The horse stood still, his dark eyes focused on Sarah as if he had been waiting for her. There was something in that moment, something that she couldn't explain, that made her feel seen for the first time in a long while. He wasn't just a horse, he was a presence. As they got closer, the horse took a few cautious steps forward, his ears twitching in curiosity. Sarah's heart raced. She had always loved animals, but she hadn't been able to experience the same kind of connection she once had. She wasn't sure if it was the time she'd spent in solitude or the longing inside her, but something about the way the horse regarded her made her feel as if she wasn't alone anymore. The horse reached the fence, his head lowering to her level. Sarah instinctively reached out her hand, unsure of what would happen next. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then, without any warning, the horse's large, gentle nose nudged her hand with a softness that took her by surprise. The feeling was electric. A spark of connection ignited between them, and Sarah couldn't help but smile, the corners of her lips lifting for the first time in what felt like forever. The horse stayed there, his head resting gently on the fence, as if he knew exactly what Sarah needed. For a few moments, they simply stood there together, neither of them speaking, but both of them understanding that this was no ordinary meeting. The quiet bond that began to form between them was powerful, unspoken, and life-changing. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she felt a warm wave of emotion wash over her. She wasn't just looking at a horse. She was connecting with something far deeper. In that single, simple moment, Thunder had done something she hadn't experienced in months. He made her feel alive again. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself returning to the farm, her visits becoming more frequent with each passing day. It wasn't the promise of fresh air or a change of scenery anymore. What drew her in was Thunder, the horse who had so effortlessly captured her heart from the very first moment. Every time she arrived, she was filled with a sense of anticipation, as if she knew something incredible was waiting for her. It started small, these quiet moments shared between the girl and the horse. At first, Thunder would watch her from the distance, his dark eyes always alert but never intrusive. Sarah would sit by the fence, just watching him as he grazed or wandered about the pasture. His movements graceful and effortless. He was the very picture of freedom, and for Sarah, he became a symbol of everything she longed for, the ability to move without boundaries, to live without limitations. But as the days passed, something shifted. It wasn't just the farm that had started to feel like home to Sarah. It was Thunder, too. Each time she returned, he seemed to recognize her. His ears would perk up when he heard the sound of her wheelchair rolling across the gravel path, and the moment he saw her, he would slowly make his way toward the fence, his steps sure and steady. Sarah, for her part, began to look forward to these visits more than anything else in her life. She would sit with him for hours, even when the weather turned cold, just feeling his presence next to hers. There was something peaceful about it, something that filled the empty spaces she had carried inside for so long. Thunder didn't need to speak to her. He didn't have to try to cheer her up or offer words of encouragement. He simply existed in her world, and that was enough. As time went on, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in her connection with Thunder. At first, she had only dared to reach out a hand to him through the fence, but now, she found herself slowly inching closer, gathering the courage to touch him. One afternoon, with her heart pounding in her chest, she slowly reached out to him, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his sleek coat. To her surprise, Thunder didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his body warm and soft beneath her fingertips. It was as though he understood her need, her longing for connection, and without hesitation, he welcomed it. It wasn't just the physical touch that deepened their bond. It was something more. Thunder began to respond to her in ways Sarah could never have imagined. Sometimes, when she was having a particularly hard day, she would find herself sitting quietly by the fence, fighting the urge to cry. And in those moments, without fail, Thunder would come to her. He would nudge her gently with his nose, as though telling her everything would be okay. The warmth of his presence seemed to erase the weight of her worries, if only for a moment. There was an unspoken communication between them, a silent understanding that went far beyond words. When Sarah would speak softly to him, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall, Thunder would lower his head as if listening. He never judged her, never made her feel inadequate. With him, there were no expectations, no pressures to be anyone other than herself. He accepted her, just as she was. One afternoon, when the sun was setting and the sky painted itself in shades of pink and gold, Sarah found herself sitting at the edge of the pasture, Thunder standing beside her. She wasn't sure what made her do it, but she reached out and placed her hand on his mane. Felt right, natural, even. Without a second thought, she slowly leaned in, resting her head against his broad shoulder. The gentle rhythm of his breathing calmed her, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt at peace. It was in that moment, with the cool breeze brushing against their faces and the world around them quiet, that Sarah realized something profound. Thunder wasn't just a horse. He was her friend, her confidant, her silent supporter. And somehow, in the most unexpected way, he had become the one thing that Sarah never thought she would find again. The bridge to her heart, the companion who helped her feel truly alive. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet ache of uncertainty never quite left Sarah. She stayed by Thunder's side through it all, watching with bated breath as he slowly recovered from his injury. The horse, who had once been so strong and full of life, was now fragile and vulnerable, his body weakened by the fall. Every day, Sarah could feel her heart breaking a little more, not knowing what the future held for her dear friend. But she refused to give up. Neither of them had given up before, and she wasn't about to start now. Each morning, Sarah would arrive at the farm, eager to see if Thunder had made any progress. The first few days were filled with worry, the farmer's quiet reassurances doing little to ease the tension in the air. Thunder's recovery was slow. He could stand for brief moments, but his legs shook, his movements stiff and uncoordinated. The bond between them, however, remained unwavering. Sarah sat beside him every day, brushing his coat, talking to him softly, as if telling him the world outside the barn still had beauty and purpose, even if he couldn't feel it yet. Thunder, for his part, never pulled away. His dark eyes would flicker towards Sarah whenever she spoke to him, and although he couldn't express it in words, it was clear that her presence was a comfort to him, just as his had been to her. It was as if the two of them were quietly healing together, both of them broken in different ways but finding strength in each other. One afternoon, as Sarah sat on her usual bench by the barn, watching Thunder attempt to take a few shaky steps around the paddock, something extraordinary happened. He paused for a moment, his head raised high as though sensing something within himself. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched him carefully, her heart pounding. Could it be? Was he trying to stand tall again? Thunder took another step, and then another. It was slow, deliberate, and unsteady, but it was progress, real, tangible progress. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she realized what was happening. Thunder was finding his strength again. It wasn't just his body that was recovering. It was his spirit, the spark of life that had once defined him. The same spirit that had carried him through countless races was flickering back to life. And Sarah, the girl who had once felt lost, was witnessing it. With a gentle nudge, Thunder took a few more steps, each one more confident than the last. Sarah's heart swelled with emotion as she watched him. She could feel the tears streaming down her face, but this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope, of renewal. She knew that this moment marked a turning point, not just in Thunder's journey, but in hers as well. The transformation wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. In helping Thunder find his strength, Sarah was rediscovering her own. Thunder moved closer to Sarah, his movements steady now, each one more graceful than the last. He reached the fence where Sarah sat, and for the first time in weeks he didn't stop. He nudged her gently, his large head resting against her shoulder. Sarah let out a soft, shaky laugh, her heart full of gratitude and love. She reached up, her hand trembling as she touched his mane, her fingers brushing against the familiar softness of his coat. "I knew you could do it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. For a moment, it was as if the world around them paused. Thunder stood there, his body tall and strong again, as if no time had passed at all. And Sarah, the girl who had once felt trapped by her own circumstances, found herself standing alongside him, not physically, but in spirit. Together they had transformed. Together, they had found strength in one another when it seemed impossible. Thunder's recovery wasn't just about regaining his ability to walk. It was about healing something deeper within both of them. They had become more than just a girl and a horse. They had become each other's support, each other's reason to keep going, and each other's reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always a flicker of light waiting to break through. As Thunder took another confident step forward, Sarah knew that they were both ready for whatever came next. They had both found a way back to the life they had once lost, not through grand gestures or dramatic changes, but through the quiet bond they had built, step by step. And in that moment, Sarah realized something profound. Together, they could face anything. In the weeks that followed Thunder's recovery, Sarah's life was never quite the same. What had once felt like a never-ending cycle of monotony and isolation now held new meaning. Every morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the anticipation of a better world outside her window, but the promise of her bond with Thunder growing deeper. The world had shifted in subtle, yet profound ways, and Sarah could feel it in her heart. Thunder had become more than just a horse to her. He was her companion, her healer, her silent strength. Where he had once been the picture of power and grace, now he was a symbol of resilience and transformation. With each passing day, Thunder grew stronger. His steps, once uncertain and hesitant, had become confident and sure. He moved with the same energy and passion that had first captivated Sarah's heart, and she couldn't help but marvel at how far he had come. But it wasn't just Thunder's recovery that had transformed Sarah's life. She had changed too. It was as if, in the process of helping him regain his strength, she had rediscovered her own. The girl who had once felt trapped by her circumstances, the girl who had spent countless days wishing for a life she couldn't have, had found a new sense of purpose. Thunder had taught her something invaluable. That even in the darkest moments, there was always room for hope, for growth, and for change. Her visits to the farm had become a ritual, one that she looked forward to with a sense of joy she hadn't felt in years. The time spent with Thunder was no longer about simply watching him from the sidelines. It was about actively participating in his healing and, in turn, her own. Sarah had taken on more responsibility, helping with his care, brushing him down after each ride, and even learning to communicate with him in ways that went beyond words. She had also begun to challenge herself in ways she hadn't before. With Thunder's recovery came Sarah's growing confidence in her own abilities. She no longer felt bound by her wheelchair, though she still used it. She had started attending therapy more regularly, determined to regain more of her mobility, even if only a little at a time. The presence of Thunder in her life had sparked a fire within her, a desire to keep pushing forward, to keep striving for more. Her parents noticed the change too. The girl who had once been withdrawn and distant now laughed more freely, shared her thoughts more openly, and approached life with a sense of optimism that had been absent for so long. They watched as Sarah took ownership of her healing process, no longer waiting for something outside of herself to change, but instead embracing the power she had within. On a particularly clear afternoon, as Sarah sat on the farm's porch with Thunder grazing peacefully nearby, she reflected on how far they had both come. She remembered the day when Thunder had fallen, when she had feared losing him, and how that fear had paralyzed her. Now, sitting beside him, She realized that the transformation had been a journey they had taken together. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of pain, of uncertainty. But those moments had given way to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be truly alive. Thunder's recovery was the catalyst for her own, and she knew in her heart that their bond was unbreakable. They had both learned that strength wasn't just about physical power. It was about resilience, trust, and the willingness to rise again, no matter how many times life knocked you down. As Sarah wheeled herself back toward her parents, Thunder trotting happily by her side, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. She wasn't just a girl in a wheelchair anymore. She was a girl who had found her strength, her purpose, and her freedom. And all it had taken was one horse, one extraordinary friendship, and the willingness to believe in herself once more. The day Sarah had been dreading for weeks had finally arrived. It wasn't a day she had anticipated, nor one she had hoped for. But sometimes, life had a way of pulling us in directions we weren't ready to go. And today, it was pulling Sarah toward an end she hadn't been prepared for. Thunder was going to leave the farm. It wasn't because he was sick or injured again. No, Thunder had recovered completely. He was strong, graceful, and back to the horse he had once been. His coat gleamed in the sun, his steps were steady, and his eyes, once clouded with pain, were now bright and full of life. But circumstances had changed. The farmer, whose land had become Thunder's home, had decided to sell the farm. The new owners didn't want horses. They wanted a different type of livestock. Thunder, along with the other animals, was going to be moved to another ranch far away. Sarah had tried to fight the reality, but she knew deep down that there was nothing she could do. Thunder had been a gift in her life, one that had healed her in ways she had never expected. He had brought her joy, strength, and a sense of freedom she had once thought was lost. But like all gifts, Thunder wasn't hers to keep forever. She had known this from the beginning, but the thought of losing him was still unbearable. She arrived at the farm early that morning, the sun barely rising above the horizon. Thunder was already in the paddock, his mane flowing in the gentle breeze, his presence as majestic as ever. Sarah wheeled herself toward him, her heart heavy in her chest. Each turn of the wheels felt like an eternity, the weight of the goodbye pressing down on her with every inch. When she reached the fence, she paused for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Thunder looked up when he heard the familiar sound of Sarah's wheelchair. He walked over slowly, his steps measured, but there was a softness in his eyes as if he too knew what was happening. Sarah held out her hand, and without hesitation, Thunder leaned his head against the fence, nudging her gently as though offering comfort. "I'm going to miss you, Thunder," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "More than you'll ever know." The tears that had been building in her eyes finally spilled over, and she let them fall freely. Thunder's presence, so strong and steady, had always been a refuge for her. And now, as their time together was coming to an end, Sarah felt as though a part of her was being torn away. She had grown so much because of him, and the thought of no longer having him by her side was unbearable. But as the minutes passed, a sense of peace began to settle over Sarah. She realized that Thunder had given her more than she could ever repay. He had helped her find strength in herself that she never knew existed. He had been her constant companion through her darkest days, and now she had to let him go. Not because she wanted to, but because it was time for both of them to move forward, to find new journeys, new purposes. Thunder nudged her once more, as if to remind her that their bond wasn't defined by proximity. It was defined by the heart. "You'll always be with me," Sarah whispered, the words carrying a weight of truth. In here, she placed her hand over her chest, where she could feel the steady beat of her heart. And in here, she pointed to her head. Always. The truck arrived a short time later, ready to take Thunder away. As the farmer and his team began to load Thunder onto the trailer, Sarah watched from the fence, her heart heavy but full of gratitude. Thunder turned once more before climbing into the trailer, his dark eyes meeting hers. It was a silent farewell, a promise that they would always be connected, no matter the distance between them. As the truck drove away, Sarah stayed by the fence, watching until the last trace of thunder disappeared from view. The tears still flowed, but now, there was a sense of relief mixed with the sadness. She had given him everything she could, and he had done the same for her. Their journey had come to an end, but it had been a journey that changed her life forever. With a final, bittersweet smile, Sarah turned her wheelchair toward home, knowing that no goodbye was ever truly final when the bond was as deep as theirs. Thunder would live on in her heart, and every lesson, every moment they shared would remain with her forever. Their time together had been brief, but it had been everything. And that, she realized, was enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Let us know how Thunder and Sarah's incredible journey inspired you. And if you believe in the power of friendship and resilience, subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that will uplift your spirit. Share this story with someone who needs a little hope today, and remember, sometimes the deepest bonds are the ones that change our lives forever. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an inspiring story.